Okay, well, it's 11:30 right on the dot, so I'll get started. My name is Sarah Schmitt. I am the director of Witness to Dignity. Witness to Dignity is a nonprofit that provides disability and mental health support to churches and private schools. So, a lot of the time that means that we provide training or resources, whatever a church or private school might need, consultations, stuff like that. So today we're going to talk about executive functioning skills and how to manage them when stress becomes too much. So it's going to be a great talk. um, Here is what we'll go over in this session. So first, we're going to go over executive functioning skills, what they are. Then we'll talk about what the brain is doing when people are using their executive functioning. And then next, we'll talk about why people have difficulty with executive functioning. And lastly, we'll talk about strategies for dealing with those stressful situations. So I want to tell a little story first. Back when I was in college, a neighbor mom that I babysat for heard that I was getting my degree in special education, and she asked what recommendations I had for people struggling with executive functioning. And I was like, I was familiar with the term, but I didn't really know a ton of strategies at that point. And she was shocked. She was like, I mean, this is executive functioning is the foundation of so much. And I felt so embarrassed because this was something I was studying, and I was like, what is executive functioning? So I just share that because I know that even though, I know about it a lot more now, throughout my career, I know that the term executive functioning can feel overwhelming, and I just want to make sure that it's really accessible. So we're going to dive into it today, and hopefully you'll come away with a better understanding of it and feel really confident talking about it. So we're going to dive into what it is. Executive functioning is the organization center of the brain. Think of it kind of as like the command center that is operating our more complex thinking tasks. So the things that we need to do, examples, organization, planning for events, you switching your plans to come here instead of go in person is something that it's a way that we use our executive functioning. So it's definitely a center of the brain that is important and really helps us to do a lot of different things. And there's kind of two main types of executive functioning skills. There's the problem solving skills, and then there's the behavior skills. Something important to note is that everyone has executive functioning skills. Everyone is working on their executive functioning skills. But there are deeper impacts or more significant impacts in a lot of the disabilities and mental health needs that we support in our family and friends, or that we know in our family and friends, or even ourselves. And so executive functioning can be impacted in those things. So here are the 10 main executive functioning skills. There's a few different opinions. Experts vary in naming the different skills. Some say that there's really only 3 main skills that we need to pay attention to. Others say that there's a lot more. I feel like this list right here is pretty comprehensive in having the executive functioning skills covered. So planning, organization, time management, working memory, metacognition, that one's such a mouthful, self-regulation, emotional regulation, attention and focus, task initiation, and flexibility. And so I'll kind of get into what those are a little bit more here. So metacognition, sorry, I have a fidget in my hand and I dropped it. I'm using my strategies. So I will try not to do that and make a noise on the recording. But metacognition is really the idea that we are thinking about our thinking. So it is kind of the foundation of executive functioning. It's the way that we are able to improve in things because we're able to reflect and see, how am I thinking about this thing, or how am I acting in this situation, and to be able to take a perspective back. So it's really a great skill. Flexibility, that is navigating change, really. That's the best way to describe it. It's responding to change with an open mind, being able to collaborate with other people, even if things don't go the way that we planned them. It's our ability to connect with people when maybe situations aren't exactly what we had hoped that they would be. And then we have organization and planning. So, organization is really creating and maintaining a system for keeping ideas and items tidy. So, it's organizing in, maybe your pantry is organized, but it's also the ability to recall information in and kind of go back to that file in your mind that has a very specific topic and relate that to the things that you're talking about in the moment. It's also setting priorities across various aspects of daily life. So, how do we know what to tackle first when we get into tasks? And then planning really goes along very well with organization. And that is really identifying steps, actions, and timing involved in different tasks, activities, things that we need to be able to do in our daily life. And it's also really important to be able to plan and organize well when you don't have a deadline. How do we tackle that project? A lot of times people procrastinate on things because there isn't a deadline and they don't necessarily feel that pressure. So that's an executive functioning skill as well. Working memory and task initiation. So working memory is recalling and holding information. If you work in education, then a lot of teachers start their lesson by saying, "Remember, yesterday we learned about the history of Abraham Lincoln. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about that." So it's really that way to connect what we already know about something and kind of add in some new info and hold on to it. It also applies to information, routines, tasks, relationships. It helps us to, remember what a friend said when we talked with them the last time. So that's a really good skill. Task initiation, it's using relevant behaviors and timing to begin something. So making sure that if you have a lot of steps in a task, that you start it within the right timing to be able to finish on time. It also incorporates the skills of planning and time management. All of these skills really are very well connected to each other. Emotional and self-regulation. So emotional regulation is really managing emotions and emotional responses. It's the ability to navigate unexpected and unfamiliar situations, especially emotional ones, and respond in a way that is, healthy, appropriate. Excuse me. And then also being attuned to our emotions and the emotions of others, being able to connect to how someone might feel about something, and be able to respond in a way that's appropriate to that situation. And then self-regulation is responding in a way that matches the situation. So if you have something unexpected happen, responding in a way that is, you know, it connects to the situation. So having self-control when things are really scary and difficult, or when you're frustrated, being able to respond with to that frustration with a behavior that is safe and healthy. So being able to navigate those things. Time management and attention and focus. Realistically, estimating and executing those time related tasks, time management is key. It's really keeping track of activities and events, staying on top of responsibilities, making sure that you meet those deadlines. And even if you don't meet those deadlines, making sure that you have a plan of action moving forward. I think a lot about, kiddos with ADHD or autism. There's something that they call time blindness. And this is really just the idea that you might feel like you have a lot more time to do something. And then the time just gets eaten up and you don't have as much time. So being able to have time management is a really good executive functioning skill. Attention and focus, and that's really keeping one's mind on the tasks or situations. This is really eliminating those distractions, making sure that there's not a lot of noise in the environment. Our feelings aren't becoming so overwhelming that we're not be able to focus, and then also sensory distractions can come into that too. So, what is going on in the brain when it comes to executive functioning? We're going to become brain experts today together. So, I'm going to have you all make a fist with me. If you look at the fist, this is a really great view of the brain, a model of the brain. So, this is a view of the brain from the side. And executive functioning is mainly occurring in that frontal lobe. So it's right here on the screen, right here in the frontal lobe. As you get deeper and farther away from this part of the brain systems, the actions, the responses that the brain is doing, they get more fundamental. So it's kind of that breathing, that heart rate, those bodily functions, as well as those motor movements. So you can see that down here. So that means that this front part of our brain where the executive functioning is it involves those more complex thinking tasks. So if we take our fist, this is from Dr. Dan Siegel. He created this really practical way to connect the brain to something that we can see, our own hand. So it's really cool because you can do this with kids. You can even talk about what our brain is doing when certain things happen. So the wrist here, this bottom part is the brain stem. That's where our bodily activities happen, our breathing, our heart rate. That's that more foundational part. As you get deeper into the inside of the brain, you have some of those other systems here. If you curl your fingers over, this is the front part of the lobe. That's the frontal lobe where executive functioning occurs. So really cool to have that model, right? So when we think about how the brain processes information, especially stress, the brain signals first will flow from that foundational part of the brain stem through the brain to the different areas. So the brain is signaling to see which part is going to get dialed in, which part do we need to have online. As people experience their stress, their brain kind of takes a more complex functions offline. So in the hand brain model, they kind of open it up so that the brain can kind of focus on this foundational part here. So this is why when people get really preoccupied by their basic needs, food, water, shelter, safety, security, they're less available to be able to use their executive functionings because they're really just trying to be in that foundational part and have that system of their brain really taken care of. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but as stress happens, it kind of signals our brain and signals our brain, and then it kind of does this thing where we flip our lid, they say, and that is taking our brain, our executive functions offline because it's really focusing on that stress and like, what do we do about this situation? So that's what's happening in the brain. Why is executive functioning difficult? So there's three different reasons, really three main reasons why executive functioning can become difficult for people. And it could include, that the brain is working in other areas, so it needs to focus on those areas. Maybe there's a lack of practice or opportunity. Also, they could be experiencing high levels of stress and crisis. And so they're just focused on, being safe and feeling secure in that situation. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. As the brain is working in other areas, we know that it prevents executive functioning from being the focus. We can't focus on those complex thinking tasks because the brain is really working overtime in another area. So, for example, you might have an adult with cerebral palsy. This is an example of how our brain is using work. So, cerebral palsy, and they are working to regulate their motor functions and navigate through a public building. So they're walking with a mobility aid, planning their path to get to the door. They're chatting with a friend, and they're kind of focused on all those things, and their body is working on all those things a little bit in the background of things. But say that someone runs into them really quickly and their brain suddenly went from working in that background to now needing to refocus on how do I avoid injury or falling? How do I make sure not to bump into this person? And, using my mobility aid to stable me. So kind of thinking about that situation and what the brain is doing. So likely the conversation with the friend gets interrupted. Now the person's brain is working overtime to keep their body safe. Executive functioning is just, it's offline temporarily until the motor and muscle movement part of the brain is not working so hard. So that can really be a situation that happens to a lot of different people. We face those, disability or not. We have situations where our brain needs to work on something and we can't have that executive functioning be working in the moment, just because it's just not time for it. Um, and there's a lot of times where people's disabilities or mental health conditions make it so that their brain is requiring more focus in other parts. So that's what their brain is focusing on. I think it's also important to kind of reframe a common misconception while we're talking about brain work. And that's that some people think that disabilities or mental health conditions are using less part of their brain. And that is actually the opposite. Really, their brains are working harder to be able to navigate life with their condition. So, it's kind of important to remember that. We all know this, but it's just a good reminder. So another reason that people have difficulty with executive functioning skills is because they may need more practice or opportunities. This can be a lack of opportunities in their environment. I think of those kiddos back in 2020 who were at home and how much less they likely had opportunities to navigate their working memory, their time management. It just wasn't something that they were, able to focus on. They had um, a lot less opportunity and practice for that. Kids, teens, or adults may also have difficulty with executive functioning skills because they're overwhelmed with their sensory experiences. So it's important to kind of remember those things too. And then stress and crisis. The last most common reason that people have difficulty with executive functioning skills is when they experience high levels of stress or crisis. So remember, we talked about in that hand brain model and how the brain goes offline. People kind of flip their lid and focuses more on those fundamental or basic needs, that their brain is going into fight, flight, or freeze. So fight is a person's response to high stress or crisis as high, intense emotions. Maybe they feel jumpy. Flight is a person's desire to respond to stress or crisis by getting away, running as far as they can from the situation, either mentally or physically. And then freeze is feeling really detached or numb, even kind of frozen, without a way to move forward in a situation that's high stress or crisis. Fun is sometimes used when we talk about responses to high stress. I think of it a little bit more as kind of an everyday approach to relationships, a little bit more than a response to stress and crisis, because it's kind of an everyday response. And that is, that people are a little less stimulated and fun, and really it's bending over backwards for people. So, like I said, that's a little bit less of a crisis response as it is more of kind of an approach to situations and conflict. So, what happens in high stress and crisis? We know that people who experience high stress and crisis are often going through a cycle or a climb toward escalation. And that in order to get past crisis, when they're up here all the way in crisis, they kind of have to go down the mountain. They have to go down to de escalate and calm down. So, that's why a mountain is a really great representation for the crisis cycle. And we know that when people experience high levels of stress or crisis, that they're essentially experiencing such high levels of stress and emotional overwhelm that they will seem to blow up or flip their lid, right? We kind of have that hand model. So in that hand model, we experience those high levels of stress or emotional overwhelm. The brain is signaling and signaling and signaling until it has no choice but to take the rest of it offline and to just focus on the foundational stuff. So we know that when people experience high levels of stress and crisis, their ability to process, reason, communicate, and understand goes down. That's that more complex thinking task, right? So someone in crisis, when you say calm down, they're definitely not thinking of, of course they want to calm down, but telling them to calm down is they're not going to be able to process that. They're not going to be able to think of, yeah, I should calm down right now. All they're focused on is how upset they are, how much they're feeling, and that's all that they can think about and all that they can process through. So it definitely makes it more difficult to use those executive functioning skills. So makes it more difficult for self-regulation. That's an executive functioning skill. Definitely goes offline when people experience crisis and high stress. So an important thing to note is that people who have high levels of stress in their life on a regular basis, or even people who experience trauma, will often sit higher in this escalation part than others who don't have as much stress. So it may seem like there are people in your life, or maybe that's even you at some point, where you're experiencing stress and it just takes a second to get overwhelmed and to really have those intense emotions and feelings. And that's because the stress because you're sitting at such a high stress, little amounts of stress can just make the lid flip. Your body's like, I gotta get out of here. I gotta do something. I gotta respond. So that can happen in crisis. And it can be overwhelming to support someone who is experiencing crisis. It can be really, it can feel defeating and you can feel helpless because you don't know exactly what to do. So we're going to talk about strategies now on how do we help people who are experiencing crisis, their executive functioning goes offline. How do we support them and help them to de-escalate and to have, more improvement in those executive functioning skills. So the first thing we want to talk about is practice. And a lot of times when it comes to executive functioning, and this is, especially for ADHD, autism, we kind of ask that question, like, how do we get people motivated? Why are people unmotivated? And it really is important to remember that it's not about them not being motivated. So this we are going to talk a little bit about this article, and actually it's funny because Mark Bradford mentioned an article from the Netherlands, and this is from another article in the Netherlands about motivation and why people have difficulty, especially in the areas of executive functioning. So how do we improve these skills? We want to think about autonomy, relatedness, and competency. So if we're going to tap into getting someone to improve their executive functioning skills, we really want to target these three areas. How do we get them to have more autonomy, more relatedness, and more competency? So, it's just important to remember those things. So when people have choice or autonomy, they are more likely to take a jump into those more difficult situations. They're going to take more risks. They're going to remember to plan things. They're going to feel more motivated or more likely to get into remembering things, keeping things organized, having that time management. We also want to tap into the relatedness or the connection with others. So if something is about being close to others, then people are going to be more motivated to do those things. So is there a way that we can keep someone organized by having it be motivated by or connected to connection with others? And then lastly, competency. So people need to feel like the tasks that they're doing are easy and comfortable. And so what that means is that sometimes we need to break things down into smaller steps, and that helps people to feel more successful, more competent in doing those tasks. So how do we improve stress in the first place? We want to be able to improve stress so that we can kind of get into those executive functioning things. So first, people need to have an outlet for stress. It could be exercise, prayer, talking with someone, It could be, having a healthy coping skill to be able to release stress. And it's important to have it. Otherwise, we just kind of get to that place where we just flip our lids, right? Dr. Bruce Perry, he is a neurobiologist who studies the effects of stress and trauma, especially on kids, which is great to have his expertise. He says that one of the key factors in helping people to get better with stress is small, like little, consistent opportunities to practice dealing with stress. So, being part of a sports team, a club, having an upcoming test, not only does that help our kiddos have more inclusion, more belonging, but it helps them to be able to deal with stress and to learn how to better deal with stress. So the more that they practice stress in those safe, small, little opportunities, that helps people, even people with really high levels of stress and trauma, that helps them to feel more connected and to feel more successful in dealing with stress. Dr. Bruce Perry also says that the strongest factor in reducing negative impacts of stress and crisis and trauma is connection with a trusted person. And I love that, especially because we're talking about our faith, the connection that we can have with God, but also with other people in our faith community. That's super important. So for students, this would be an adult, like a parent, a teacher, a mentor. It could be your CCD teacher, or I know we call it faith formation, or other things like that. But just those connections to be able to have with someone to kind of help us reduce that stress and to improve things overall. For adults who are struggling with stress, this could be friends, family. It could be someone in work that you consider a mentor. So those are ways that we improve stress. So strategy one, we're going to dive into. This is how to deal with high stress and how to improve executive functioning. So first, proactively, we're going to approach all these strategies with what do we do before the situation happens, and then how do we respond in the moment. So first, proactively, we want to teach a variety of coping skills ahead of time so that people have a bank to choose from when it's needed. And this really should be individualized. It should be preferences that specific people have. It's if someone that doesn't like puzzles, asking them to do a puzzle or teaching them to do a puzzle to be able to calm down is not going to help them calm down. So coping strategies, they can range from squeezing something like a stress ball when frustrated. Some people like to do yell into a pillow. If you yell into a pillow, sometimes it makes you feel better. Some people like doing arts and crafts to be able to calm down, taking a walk to talk about fears. Walking alongside someone and expressing your emotions is a really great, healthy way to have a coping skill. In the moment of stress, though, the responses that we want to have in the moment of stress is just reminding someone of those coping strategies. We can do that by providing a visual to support them. We can provide just tools, maybe have stress balls really accessible, and other stuff like that. Or suggest, do you want to go for a walk? We can talk about how you're feeling in this situation. Our next strategy is acknowledgement. So proactively, this is especially helpful in reducing moments of stress and increasing those executive functioning skills. So we want to focus on how are we praising, how are we reinforcing when someone uses those skills, or, say someone is really trying to work on keeping their room organized, focusing on the little steps toward that. So maybe their entire room is not organized, but they have an area where all of their clothes are cleaned up and their clothes are either in the hamper or they're put away where they should be. That's a great step towards success. So we want to acknowledge that ahead of time. That will help people to increase, then they're feeling that autonomy, they're feeling connection. So all those things come into play to be able to improve that. And then when people are experiencing high levels of stress, high levels of stress, acknowledgement can really come into that moment if we're honoring and acknowledging how they're feeling in the moment. So someone can say, I'm really frustrated because I didn't do well on my test. And we can support them. We can say that, yeah, that must be really frustrating. What do you think you want to do to be able to improve in this situation? So honoring feelings is a great way to de-escalate a situation, to help people to calm down. Often, sometimes when people feel heard, it almost immediately calms them down quicker. So it's a really great tool to be able to use in the moment. And then our last strategy is to give choices and set expectations for safe behaviors. So proactively, we want to always give choices. It's, again, a great way to keep up that autonomy someone has in maybe their routines or activities. We want to also provide choices to be able to help them to connect to how meaningful a task might be. So choices are a really great way. It's best to give people three choices. Sometimes if you kind of give an either or, it doesn't really feel like full autonomy to someone. So giving choices is a great strategy proactively. And then also in response to high levels of stress or crisis, you can give a choice to a person to use their coping skills. You can help them channel their feelings into an activity to be able to de-escalate. Giving choices is a great way to respond. And then also we want, in the moment when stress is just so overwhelming, we want to be able to provide safe behaviors or expectations for those safe behaviors. We want to be able to suggest alternatives. So maybe if someone is throwing something because they're super upset, their brain is offline, all they're focused on is getting these feelings out. They're not so much focused on regulating, having a little bit more self-control. Then we can ask them, would you rather squeeze something right now? Do you want to tear up some paper? Do you want to throw a ball instead of throwing an item? That might help them to get their feelings out through that activity. So these are some strategies that we can use to be able to respond to those moments of really intense stress and crisis. So that wraps up our presentation. If you are interested in learning more about executive functioning, Witness to Dignity has a free online training right now. It's free for everyone. You just sign up through the Scholar subscription. And that executive functioning bundle that we have, it has 10 different modules that talk about the different skills in detail. It has a lot of resources. There's some checklists to be able to determine if someone needs support in specific areas. And there's a lot of resources on strategies on how to improve executive functioning skills. So if anyone is interested in that, you can go to our website at witnesstodignity.com. And now, if anyone has any questions, I would love to, or any comments, I would love to hear from you all.
Hi, yeah, I have a question regarding those free classes. Is I work with catechists and things like that to try and help them teach my DRE to help them teach students. Are there any particular one of those 10 modules that would be particularly good for like catechists teaching religious ed?
Oh, that's a really good question. So they're all geared towards either private school teachers or catechists, people that work in ministry, and how to support executive functioning skills in those particular settings. But yeah, any one of those, I think, so the modules start with an explanation of executive functioning, and then it starts with 5 tips on how to support it. So even just starting with those two, that would be awesome, just to be able to get people a good foundation. And then, we can always work to create anything else that you might need.
Thank you.
Yep. Have a question in the chat.
Could you speak a little bit to some older? So I have a teenage son who definitely, when he goes into crisis, just has a loss of those executive functioning skills. And he is old enough to feel that when we are offering him choices or giving him those suggestions, would you like to go for a walk? Would you like to shoot baskets? Things like that to help de-escalate. And I think that's probably a situation where he is already at a heightened state. But he's like, you're therapizing me, and I will refuse to do
Mm.
any of the skills that that we've talked about. So, what are some suggestions when you're in that situation with someone who knows his skills but won't use them?
That's a great question. And I think it really goes back to, anybody with their executive functioning, if they know enough to know that they're not using their executive functioning skills, then that's even more frustrating to the person because they're like, I know I want to, be calm and to use these skills, but also, I just don't want to feel the way that I'm feeling. So I definitely think one thing you could do is to say, I'm here whenever you're ready, or I can also take a step back and let you have some space, and kind of just like narrating that you're available but that you're not trying to pressure or add to the situation. That could help the situation. And then other things is like, what strategies you want to use, so use use your strategies when you're ready, just kind of having them available for the person to use. And that way there is that autonomy. They can choose to use things. Yeah, I think the more practice ahead of time, the better it becomes. But at the same time, in the moment, it's just really hard if they can just let out their feelings some way that is safe, and, know that you're still there. That also really helps, just to know that people are there to connect with them after.
Thank you.
Yep. So good question here. Looking for specifics on how to help in the high stress crisis mode. Suggestions cannot be acted upon when yeah, definitely. So, um, definitely waiting to make a suggestion is a great idea. It's hard because we want to do something to make this moment better for the person, right? Or to even just, it's just so uncomfortable to sit with someone in high levels of stress or in crisis. And I think even just our presence being there is helpful, but adding, more to the moment, adding more, questions, it definitely could escalate. So yeah, it's hard. It's so hard to wait in the moment, but it might be the best thing. Um, oh, I like that. It might be a moment to really reflect his emotions back on him. Another great strategy too is when someone has, a moment of really high stress crisis or lots of intense emotions, after the fact, being a supportive listener, just asking them, like, what was going on with you during that moment? And also emphasizing that they don't need to apologize for feeling the feelings that they're feeling, but there might be some need to apologize or repair for the behaviors that we use that might be, unsafe behaviors. If they're throwing something because it's just impulsive, to really be able to reflect back and think, they can say, I didn't mean to throw something. I was really feeling upset in the moment. And so, we can model that for them, or we can just provide that listening space and, say, what were you feeling during that time? Definitely, I like that. Less words are better. Offering a hug or a touch if they're receptive. Definitely. If the child is escalated and saying and doing inappropriate things, it is still the right thing to be a supportive listener and wait to discuss that it was wrong when they're calm. Is it bad to give consequences? That's a really great question. So I think that it is important to figure out how consequences would change their behavior. Would they change their behavior if you gave them, for example, if someone is really upset and they're experiencing high levels of stress, and we put them in a timeout. That might not be a great response to the situation to improve their behavior. And the next time, because it's teaching them that it's bad to have emotions, you need to be alone, I don't want to be around you. We want to kind of reframe that and help them to feel like the emotions are okay. It's the behaviors that we need to change into alternatives. So the other thing too is if they do, throw something, how can they repair the damage done by throwing an item in a way that's not, um, too focused on that, but just an opportunity to do better next time, perhaps. Our school is possibly looking into creating a sensory room to help with de-escalating stress. What things would you suggest we get? Actually, we do have how to build a calming space resource on our website. It's under the resources, and it says how to build a calming space or something like that. There's a lot of great resources in that. It tells about what furniture might be great to get, some visuals that you can use. The visuals are in that packet already. And then that's a really great question too. What if they hit you or someone else? We definitely want to try to avoid that, right? We have got to figure out sooner than later if there's hitting going on or aggression of some sort, an alternative in that moment to get their emotions out in a way that makes them feel better. So, you can set that expectation. I know that you are super upset, and when I get upset, it's hard for me to control my actions, but we want to be able to do something safer. So, that's a great alternative. You can squeeze something. Um, a lot of times the hitting, they want some sort of sensory pressure input. Maybe it's, doing something like wall push-ups, not in the moment when they're too escalated, but when they're able to de-escalate in that situation. And then you can just say, it's really not safe when you hit me. We have to figure out an alternative, or if, perhaps if they're processing a little bit differently and they need visuals instead, that would be great too, to have visuals as choices for alternatives. Really, really great questions. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, we have 7 minutes left for the session, but it looks like our questions and answers have wound down. So if there's nothing else, of course, we could take a break and move on to the next session.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Sarah. That was an amazing presentation. Really grateful. So everybody, of course, this will be uploaded and available for you to watch on demand in the future. So thank you all very much for being here today. Sarah, thank you so much. Wonderful, wonderful,
Thank you.
wonderful talk.
Thank you all.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. And did you want to practice? Did you have a PowerPoint?
No, I have a couple
Okay.
things I might want to share my screen for. Yeah, so if I could test that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just hit the share screen. Oh, I see. And then it's share that. Okay, so I can show them.